So Mary sent me a question. So Mary had a couple questions, and I haven't put those people into my software yet. I can do that, but
Okay.
um, you
It
were
might
also,
be answered without it.
what's that?
It might be answered without it, but without
Um,
putting them in there.
I doubt it because I didn't have clarity on it without seeing anything. But one of your questions was just, what does it mean when someone has a lot of channels, right? Do you have a lot of channels?
I have 8 channels. So it's not so much what it means, but it has to have an impact, right? Like we know that all the open centers have an impact. Everybody talks about the impact of when you have so much openness, right? So I don't know if I'm looking for a meaning as much as how does it impact people? I'm curious. It has to have an impact. I have 8 channels. So when I see that, I mean, the immediately there's this, that's a lot. And there's a feeling that I have around it. I'm curious. I don't know if other people that have lots of channels have it. I know you've worked with tons of people. Do they have what's their experience? And this may not be the right setting for that, but I'd love for somebody to put something together that had a lot of people with a lot of channels and we could start discussing like what is the impact, if that makes sense.
I don't know, but 4 female Ghostbusters just entered the waiting room, so I'm like a little apprehensive here. Who the hell is that? Um, Hold on one second. I gotta get off this tool. Okay, so one of the things I just circled integration, right? Because you rack up a lot of channels with that. It's really one channel. I don't look at your chart and think you have, I mean, you do. You have one, two, three, four, five, six. I mean, technically integration is just one big channel.
Okay, well that makes it a little bit less
Right,
complicated
right.
for me.
Sure. But so, I mean, the obvious thing is it makes you more fixed. Now, one thing I can tell you is that when you have a lot of centers defined, right?
Yeah.
Let's jump to my chart. Okay. And, when you have two or less open centers, that means you have an incredibly concentrated not self in those centers. And, so my splenic issues and my root issues are for the history books. They're huge. They're epic, right? As compared to, just for a quick reference point, Jonah has splenic issues, but it's pretty far down the chain, right? Pretty far down the hierarchy of the not self.
Okay, wait a minute. Tell me a little bit about the hierarchy of not self. What do you mean by that? There's a
Yep. Hold on one second. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So the biggest issues for Jonah are obviously going to be here, right? It's not that there's no wisdom potential here, but the wisdom potential of a chart like this for the spleen is very different than the wisdom potential in my chart, where I'm really filtering everything through that undefined spleen, right? So it's important to learn the hierarchy of the not self, right? That really reveals a lot.
so
Right.
this the hierarchy that you drew here, that's everybody's hierarchy, and that's just Jonah's.
It's relative to Jonah's openness, right?
Okay.
So it always goes like this. Pretend that this is all, let's do this. Watch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's the hierarchy of the not self.
Okay, that's what I needed. Thank you.
Yep. So that tells you
So then
how to
if it
prioritize. It tells you how to prioritize and organize the reading, right? It tells you where the big issues are, right? So, you certainly wouldn't want to emphasize things further down the chain, in a limited time frame conversation, a one-off conversation, right? So one of the things is having a lot of centers defined, right? As I do, it means that I have a very concentrated not self, which the quote unquote benefit, which I say loosely, because nothing's really good or bad, right?
Right.
But the benefit of this is my not self is not that multifaceted, right? You have a lot of open centers, at least 3, then you start to have a very dynamic and slippery not self. It's harder to catch because all of those themes mix and match and combine, right? So, I mean, mine is very, very concentrated, and, there's a lot of themes here in any one center. I mean, it's much more nuanced and dynamic than just to say, I'm holding on to things that aren't good for me. And, I've got existential fears. That's the overarching takeaway, but it's really relative to the particular dormant gates I have, right? And the conditioning receptors here. There's all kinds of different dimensions to it. I've worked through most of them. But anyhow, it's a related but slightly different question. But with a lot of channels, I mean, one of the other things to kind of bear in mind, just looking at my chart, is, we know that as a tribal leader, right, I'm also going to be intimate with my tribe, right? For example, we know that the way that I'm leading, the style of my leadership is going to be logical and be heretical, right? So you want to kind of layer all of these things in your understanding. So the more channels, right? Let's go back to you. Everything for you, you're a very existential person, right? It's all about being in the experience, fully, right? And you have to, it's all according to your own timing, right? It's all according to your own timing, right?
Yep.
So if you commit from your sacral, right, then you can really love the experience you're in, and it operates according to your own timing, which is going to be fast. You're going to be incredibly busy, right? And hopefully it's not fruitful, unsatisfying busyness where you're merely surviving, right? So you can get lost in busyness. That can be a coping mechanism here as well. And other people's defined awareness centers can really condition this 3420, right? So you can be, you're very busy while you're actually being manipulated, conditioned, right? You're falling prey to whatever you think that you have to do to please your boss at work, for example. Right?
Yeah.
So
sometimes I feel like I am either a energy vampire, like I have more energy when I'm with other people, right? Like, am I stealing their energy, or are they just turning mine on?
Well, they're not turning yours on. I mean, you have the only energy center that can sustain energy. This is very weak right here, right? So you are picking up on stuff here, and you're going to be moving even faster. The risk here is you're already designed. So first off, let's just take a step back. What does a response look like for you in your awareness so far?
Oh, literally, I mean, I can feel it. I can feel the There is a definite push forward, right? Like I lean in. So I was pretty much, the reason I loved human design is that I understood my sacral response before I was turned on to human design. And human design had given me the language to put it in. Whether I have it exactly correct or not, I'm not sure. But I definitely, at this point, when I learned about it, literally, I was like, I needed to ask myself every morning, am I supposed to be in this relationship? And then I got a yes or a no. I thought I was asking something outside of myself at that time, but it wasn't. It really was me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's not something that I would really advise. However, what I really wanted to point at here was the fact that a response for a 3420, you don't need a guttural response there, right? So what it is you're being torn off your chair. A 3420, their response is written all over their face. It's not subtle and it's not ambiguous at all. They suddenly become animated. They suddenly start moving into action, right? So I remember my most recent relationship, she has a 3420. I might say, be nice to have a vacation. I look over my shoulder and she's already booking it, if it's correct for her. Right. So
Yeah.
You're an incredibly spontaneous design. Right. And that's vulnerable, right? Because you are revealing your cards the same time that other people are seeing them played. Right. It's very vulnerable. There's nowhere to hide in that.
I get that.
Yeah.
Well, and so it feels like that channel is broken when I talk to people and I'm like, I have had no energy to do anything, right? Like nothing has yanked me off my chair. Like I get what you're talking about, what has in the past, and nothing has come up lately. And can it be broken, or what could be in the way of that?
There's no brokenness, but there's this
You understand what I'm
distortion,
saying?
or your health can be compromised, right? So if you're running around, like a chicken with your head cut off, right, and not entering into things correctly, right, this can be thyroid issues.
Yeah.
Right, this can definitely be thyroid issues. Taking a glance in substructure stuff here. Let's see.
Because it's the other way. Literally, I haven't done anything for 2 years. Not much of anything. I was sick for a lot of that time, but even as I got quote unquote well, that piece just seems to be missing.
This chart has metabolic and thyroid vulnerabilities.
Which I get.
Yeah, not just from here, but from some substructure stuff. So it's coming at you from different places. So are you practicing your PHS? Are you in the correct environment?
I don't know about environment. It's caves. So I live in a tiny home right now. I'm in somebody else's tiny home. I'm staying there. So it could be considered caves, but I'm curious. Caves is pretty much wherever you make your little spot, right?
Yeah, within reason. I mean, I wouldn't extend that to everything. But what's true is that you can find all of the environments everywhere, right? Except you have to bear in mind the distinction between hardscape and landscape, right?
Okay.
So you are a hardscape person, right? So your immune system can handle proximity with other people, right? Whereas I can't, like long-term city living didn't do me well. I was catching a lot of colds. I did better when I was 15 minutes outside the city in a more rural area as a mountains person, right? And I do better, like where I used to live in Pennsylvania, it's not high altitude. I was spending most of my time on the second floor with a beautiful view of 50 protected acres. That was really satisfying to me, but it's very different, especially spending a lot of time in Santa Fe recently. And I do well in that environment. Still, there is an adjustment. It's 7,500 feet or whatever above sea level, right? So in any case, there are some PHS and environment implications for you, right? So that's going to be, it's going to take a toll on your health if you, neglect those practices. But in addition, I want you to just realize that this chart has, you can really be incredibly driven, right? To be the best and need to prove yourself, to prove your worth, to show what you're made of, right?
Do you know, it's so funny because what we were talking about earlier about like, I'm 58 years old, which isn't old, but still, I really believe that I've worked through a lot of that. I don't need to prove myself to anyone anymore. And I don't know if that means that I'm still out of alignment, but yes, it's taken me a really long time to work through that whole thing. and now I do understand my worth. It definitely was not the easiest thing in the world to come to that. And my worth is something that's hard to see. I have this, maybe that's the two, this ability to hear things that other people can't hear and see. And if it's hard to understand at some point, because you see whatever you see, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I think I think I've worked through that one.
Yeah, I mean, the messaging does need to be adjusted per where you're at in life, and I wasn't aware of your age, but because this is a completely open ego, there is more objectivity there, right? You can, what I always say is, you have a completely open center, much like I would say to a reflector is like, the dog jumps in the pool, gets out, sopping wet, shakes, and they're dry in a minute. Right? So you have more objectivity. You're either kind of overwhelmed, completely disoriented and overwhelmed with like, well, what is value? What does it mean for something to be of value or for me to be of value and worth? That can be a perplexing question, but you can also be completely free of it. However, you do have one snag, and the snag is gate 40. And so this chart would be inclined to think that it needs to be a provider or prove something in order to get love and affection.
I can
Right?
see that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the one trap here, is that for my friends, for my family, or to get love, I need to be a provider. I need to bring home the bacon, and or I need to show that I'm worthy. Right?
Yeah.
And I need to be polite in order to prevent any type of emotionally overwhelming situation. Mm-hmm. Right? If I adhere to those social graces, maybe I can dodge that bullet.
Yeah.
Right? And the bullet you're going to dodge is going to be dodged very fast. This is Sleeping Phoenix stuff here, 3420. Sleeping Phoenix means, you're asleep trying to survive. You just get lost in the busyness. The best way to cope is just to keep busy. Don't look around too long.
So all of that is out the window, right? Like I used to be that. That's very, very true. And with the, I don't know, is it second Saturn return? Is it the Chiron return? Is it whatever it is that I've worked through? Like stillness is where it's at for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's in the stillness. And then when I get that ripping it off the, like when I did plant medicine, the first time I did that, like it was that whole thing where I'm just gone. That was a place that I needed to be. And I got, and yeah, then it was 110 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
But there's that, it's funny because it's, and maybe that is through the stillness is where I hear what where the energy needs to be put. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, remember that you need a response to something showing up in your external environment, right? So your mind definitely knows things about you, right? It's not black and white. It's not that simple. Our minds know something about us. It knows what we've responded to in the past, but that doesn't mean that it knows how to allocate energy in the future. Just because you responded to that in past doesn't mean that that is right for you. And it certainly doesn't know the timing of that. So some of the things you're saying here is you do this inner consultation, which, I'm glancing around your chart. I do see that you have meditation sense here. This is outer vision, of course. There's a little bit of this that I think I'm picking up on. I'm going inward, with a soft gaze kind of a thing. I see the sense having a lot in common with the cognition. So Ra did say you can mix and match keynotes, but he only took that so far. So it's an edge case. It's a question for us to explore and kind of see where we land on that one. But I'm hearing stuff that sounds a bit like that. I'm also hearing stuff that I wonder, your mind is very interested in intuition, right? So consulting psychics, this kind of a thing, developing your intuition, that would be something that's very interesting to your mind. Right.
So, well, It
And
was in the past, but now I've fired my mind. I mean, that sounds really crazy, and it's like, how does anybody do that? But it feels like I have, like there's nothing, and maybe that's the problem. Not a problem, but it's like the mind is not creating whatever it wants to create. I'm not listening to it at all. Is that probably something that is getting in my way? Do I need to listen to my mind?
you need to listen to your mind and the application of the mind toward what you share with other people, in towards systems, and so on and so forth, right?
Okay.
So, you can create a lot of efficiency, for example, in an office setting, right? And if the job requires for you to always think logically, then you're the right person for that job. So remember, this is all outer authority, right? So you're firing your mind from running your life, right? But not in terms of what value it offers for other people, right?
I feel that. I
Yeah.
feel that.
Right.
Jonah had a comment.
Yeah, I just have I guess, two comments. The first kind of gets back to the original question about when you have a lot of activation. It's to point out that you have two channels between head and ajna and four channels between, well, from sacral, I guess three from sacral to G and four coming off the sacral. And what I've noticed is that it's if you just have one channel, like look at your 4323, that can stride. It can walk with full steps. When you have multiple channels between the same two centers, it's as if they're chained or they're doing like a two-legged hop thing where they both are like their legs are tied together. One can't go very far before the other needs to be appeased. So the 6447 can't make sense of things because the 634 keeps coming up with new questions and it keeps interrupting its ability to make sense of it with all these new skeptical questions. But then it's trying to get to the bottom of it and it can't because it has a flurry of new images coming in from that 64 and they're constantly interfering with each other. The same thing happens where that 3420 wants to just take a big leap and jump into action, but it has to wait for the right timing because the 515 is keeping it locked into this other timing, and that 2946 is looking for the new experience, wanting to go out, but the 515 doesn't want to go out, it wants to stay in. So it's like each one can only go out a little bit before it wants to go back in, or if it's staying in and then it gets bored and it wants to go out. I mean, it's kind of this, I've seen it again and again where the conflicting life force energies, it's not that they won't always be conflicting. There will be some perfect job that requires, these weird combinations. Like the perfect job where you need to have both the ability to make sense of something and to ask the right questions, or right? But it's just it can end up with these weird stuck areas. My only other comment was just when we're looking at the ego and that much openness. I mean, absolutely, as James is saying, that can be a real boon, and these completely open centers can have tremendous wisdom potential. Also, the classic way of keynoting this is denial, projection, and blame. And the story goes like, I don't have these problems, other people have these problems. I used to have these problems, I don't have them anymore. That is literally word for word what the story is for that much openness. So what I would say is not even to look at it as a problem, I would simply look at it as a complete blind spot of an area where it is so far removed from your conscious awareness that your only real access to it is from the dormant 37, and even then that's only when that's hooked up. So it's much more of an area of life that is just so far away from you and so far removed that it can be really, really hard to see what's going on there. And then periodically someone comes along and activates that for you, or you're conditioned in that way, and you sort of, yeah, I can see what James is saying about it being a little bit like a reflector where it may not retain as much because there's no hanging gate that can keep that fixed hook. But at the same time, it does take in conditioning. I mean, this is a generator chart that takes in conditioning, and so it will be very dependent on the people around you, and if they have a healthy sense of value and if they're reasonable people and fair and just and so on. I mean, the health of their ego. And yeah, you can become very wise just by noticing how you yourself feel, when you're around those people. But I wouldn't say that it's something that is overcome and then finished. It's a permanently open blind spot.
I hear that. Well, I think once you get awareness around it, you can remind yourself that it's a blind spot and keep asking the questions around it. I think that's where I know how to deal with that blind spot is what I think I'm saying, right? So when somebody comes into that space and gives me whatever it is, I question it because I know that it's a blind spot for me.
Yeah, or you just notice because you've had so much experience doing it that you see yourself getting in those patterns that you've been in before. You're like, I recognize this.
Yeah.
I recognize this. I know what this is all about. I felt this before. You know, you learn to recognize those ego dynamics. So yeah, there absolutely is learning. I mean, the openness is where we learn. I'm just kind of saying when it's that open, I mean, it's something that can be very invisible for us because we just don't. It's like all the energy of the chart is in other areas. It's all, you know. And I guess one final comment also when you said about the no mind thing. Yeah, I wonder if some of that is having those multiple channels that each kind of like basically channels are life force energy. And so for your life force to be vibrant and full of life, you need to be using these channels. Those channels have an obligation. You need to be sharing with people what you know and being empowered, and you need to be right. I mean, we can do some of the keynoting of what these channels are. And so I remember something that Alok Diaz said, which is that he tried meditating so much. He has a defined head ajna. He couldn't get to a place of no mind, thought it was a shortcoming, and he loved that Ra told him, no, you're not here to have no mind. Undefined head ajna people are here to have no mind. You're here to have mind. But like James is saying, it's just using that life force energy correctly when it's invited and recognized, and you can share it with people. So anyway, that's my comments. I'll pass back to James. I see you also have a question from Johnny and a question from Name. Johnny's question, well, I don't know which ones you want to look at, but
I see that. Why is it that the authority-wise, the solar plexus is more important than the ego, but in not self, that is flipped? Don't have an answer to that. Yep, good question. And Name's question, let's jump. Name, do I have this person's info?
No, but I can read it if you want to plug it into the system.
Do you want me to just do an anonymous here?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
There's nobody we all know, but anonymous would be great. Let's see. Playing it up. I'm doing this from my phone. So January 26th, 1984, 11:52 a.m. in St. Charles, Missouri.
Okay.
So I think what would help me, James, is to hear the what do I want to say? The not self, or the how somebody gets tripped up when they have such a wide split. This person has a real hard time being in their body and is very associated with their mind. So much so that they're not able to notice when they're hungry, and they're wanting to try fasting. And in the session, I was trying to get him in his body, but anyway, there was resistance. So that's what I'm looking to hear again.
They don't notice when they're hungry.
And that tripped me up as a quad left. I was like, I don't get that.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting comment from a Gate 41 personality son. Okay, so let's see here. So this person, yeah, it's definitely a wide split, right? So it would take at least 3 gates to bridge the split. So as we know, or as you might remember, Name, from analyst training, the wide split has a problem with the world, right? So it will express 2 ways. One way is that they will also see the problem in the other, but then there's this third person thing, like the world is broken, right? Do you recall that? You there, Namaste?
Yeah, I'm just trying to mute, so out of courtesy for not
No
hearing all my
worries.
clicky
No,
clack.
just
Yeah.
stay unmuted and we can dialogue a little bit about it.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the first thing. And so, you have people that they really focus their lives on healing the world because of that wide split. So for example, like Richard Rudd is a wide split. Now, the other more subtle psychological dimension here is that wide splits tend to have abandonment issues. So I want to kind of open it up for the class. Name, you may recall me speaking about this, but I'd like to open it up for the class about why would wide splits tend to have abandonment issues? Anyone like to hazard a guess there?
Well, they're either playing to one side of themselves or the other. Would that not be?
You're close. Yeah, I mean, that might be one way to say it, but I'd like to kind of hear it in different language.
I can come in with something.
Well, you might have heard my answer from class.
I have, yeah. So that's what I'm saying. If you want an answer, I've got one. And if you want to solicit the class, I got it.
Right.
Or I'm happy to pause.
Let's see what other people think.
Isn't it like about blaming the wide split? They're the problem, not me. And so they abandoned me.
It's
kind of
that,
thing.
and it's right. And so exactly, they abandoned me, right? Because of the blaming orientation. And not everyone's going to bridge their splits, right? So there can be a feeling of being lacking wholeness and completeness around a lot of other people, right? So anyhow, that's some of the wounding we have going on here. And then the hunger thing, I mean, so let's see.
And they're hot thirst.
Right. And we know that they're going to be very interested, right, in gate 30. I mean, this is going to be a very direct route. And one thing we also know is that regardless of what bridges the split, there's always a journey that the personality sun is interested in just getting to the throat in some way, shape, or form, right? What does it take to get to the throat? So it's the same journey in this case, right? And so this person is saying, they want to feel things, they've got desires that they're chasing, and in addition, there are fears around sexuality, right? Feeling sexually inadequate. I need more sexual experience, right? Or I feel emotionally inadequate, right? I need to have more life experiences so I can make progress and I can grow. Right? So all of these different things. But when I hear the hunger thing, I mean, this is the whole stream is like, about being hungry and satiated. Right? So there's something going on here. And as I think Jonah pointed out in the comments, this is completely open. Right? And this is completely open. This is pretty interesting. I've seen this before in a sex worker. I've seen a very similar configuration, actually, exactly with the 41, exactly with the 35, these two completely open centers. Because think about it, a sex worker, this person can be egoless about sex, right? Unattached in that sense, and just completely open, to whatever type of pleasure. And that can be oriented in a very impersonal way. Right.
Well, what I was going to come in with is partly how this client reached out to me is because I sent him Brayton's podcast, which was, I don't remember the title of it or which episode, but the theme was that projectors, in order to know themselves, need to be alone and, have celibacy. And this client was like, I don't want celibacy. I love being in partnership with other people.
Yeah. So there's a conflict in this person between, there is a capacity for impersonal sexuality. I mean, there is, and the chart just says that. However, in addition to that, because, as you may recall, you can see whether people want to, if they're looking for emotional intimacy tied to sexuality, right? And you look at that by seeing whether any of the gates in or pointing at the solar plexus are in harmony or resonance with the personality. And obviously it is by virtue of the fact that the personality sun is here, right? So there is a capacity for that, but they want to combine emotional intimacy, with their partnerships. So there's both things going on there. Whether they really realize they could also have impersonal sex is a different story. But yeah. And so, well, let me just take a pause. So is this helping kind of clarify things for you a little bit, or what other questions do you have?
Yeah, this is helping. Let's see. I think the other piece, maybe if there's space to continue on with this person or this example, is I was trying to land the topic that he's built for struggle, or that he really wants to struggle. But I mean, he's had a traumatic upbringing, and interesting, he was also in the military, pretty intense military, like the Marines. So he's like, I don't like, it feels like he's really exhausted from it. And so I'm trying to frame it of like, but struggle that you feel invited into could be really good for you. So anyway, something about the struggle, if you feel a response to talk about that theme.
Yeah, I mean, people with the channel of struggle make life harder than it needs to be in the not self, right? And so, of course, it's a struggle they can be invited into. This is 38.3 is what the alliances, and you can kind of drag people down, something like that. I can't remember off the top, but so, there's a lot of trial and error with what to struggle for. But, the thing here is that in the true self, Ross said the channel of struggle is the channel of enlightenment. I mean, isn't that a hell of a thing? Right? So, and let me look at some other things here.
Yeah, and just a side note there, Ra, in one lecture, uses the 2838 as an example to help us understand 3254 and the 1858. And at first glance, we might not see what any of those have to do with each other, but that can help us where if we're trying to describe to somebody using one set of words and they're resistant to that, we can try a different set of words, putting it in a different context and saying, well, just as some people persevere for material transformation to bring their life meaning, and other people try to improve and perfect things, for you, you're not really as interested in material success and ambition. You care about something more. You care about finding a deeper purpose in life.
Right.
And that's just a nice way to contrast it. But also just to point out that the 2838 will have a deaf mode, where when that's in its deaf mode, it's in the I don't know mode. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know what you mean. And nothing will convince them to change that mode. They just kind of come to it on their own. A week later, they send you a message. Now I know what you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's see here. The other thing I would say, I mean, you can look at the colors here as markers, right? And see that both fourth colors, right? Having harmony or resonance right, in this regard across the chart does indicate a capacity for embodiment or not.
Mm.
And, one thing Ross said, and so we know that the right place, right, is going to facilitate embodiment for this person. If you look at my chart, for example, Ross spoke about the fact that someone that most people don't have the same color motivation as internal determination, right? Usually they're one off. But when you do, he said, it's a deeper capacity for embodiment that could really serve an athlete, for example. Or in the not self, it could lead to neuroticism about the body and what's going on in the body. And I've already had to work through neuroticism around that because of my undefined spleen. So it's a double whammy and the survival view. So, but this is a gift of really tracking in the mind, right? What's going on in the body, right? So again, statistically, they're usually, not the same. But your person, place is really important to that end. And the other thing, it sounds like this person has got, let's look at one more thing occurs to me. Let's see here. So that. What's their orientation around health, Name? Are they preoccupied with health or survival and things of that nature?
I don't know that I know.
Okay.
I mean, they're in, like organic or regenerative farming. So they aim to eat healthy, but as far as being hyper vigilant about health, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at the distraction, from wanting, to survival. Yeah. And
his dad was in the military, so he went on to be a Marine to kind of, keep that torch going. And then I think he had a traumatic childhood, and I think being in the Marines was pretty awful for him as well. So I think that survival thing is a part of his experience, but how much he came to it on his own, I don't know.
I mean, you can imagine, right? This person goes into the Marines, completely open ego, right? And so any type of military setting is going to really put a lot of pressure here, right? That's what they do.
Well, and then the projector bitterness too, yeah.
Sure.
I think he's working through a lot of that.
Yeah, this is a person that, has one motor, not being recognized, all the things, but I'm just saying, just imagining like boot camp, and all of the push yourself to do this and push yourself even beyond how far you think you can push yourself, and so on and so forth. That's the dogma, right? In any type of military setting. And this person's prone to think they need to fix themselves in order to feel worthy, right? You feel guilty. I've got to make a contribution for my tribe. That's part of the distraction here. It's safer, maybe when we're together, I'm serving the mission, taking care of my people, etc.
Yeah, really helpful. Thank you, James and Jonah.
Yeah, you're welcome. Cool. We probably have time for one more.
Just while we are waiting for someone, and I would definitely encourage anyone who has any questions, please But I'll just mention one last thing on this body graph, which is we see that kind of blind spot theme in the ego and the solar plexus. And then we also see a completely unconscious head ajna. And anytime you see that, it's someone who's not really aware of what they know. They're not really aware of what they think. They may not really be aware of having certain opinions or beliefs. And so having even certain ideologies. So this could be someone who is really oblivious to their own beliefs, and because it's such a wide split, many of those beliefs we can kind of deconstruct where the split is, where the other or where the world is broken. So the split being on the throat, for instance, can be others are terrible communicators. Others keep me in the dark. Others lack the ability to communicate. I guess the split's also on the solar plexus going the other direction. So
Right.
that's, which is probably the preferred direction because of gate 41. So that can be other people have problems with intimacy. Other people aren't honest with me. Other people don't really show who they truly are. I show who I truly am, right? So that can just be how some of how that comes out. I see a comment from Julie. I know that James loves specific questions. So if there's anything, even just something I know about James, if there's anything specific at all, I know that he would be overjoyed to discuss.
Yeah, great point. You do want to look at where that split is, and as Joanna pointed out, if it's around a particular center, you want to look at the themes of that center. They're seeing problems with other people in regard to that particular open center. Yeah, so I'm happy to pull open your chart, Julie, which I don't have, and yeah, specifics are preferred. What's your Greenberg?
Greenberg.
Okay.
It's December 6, 1968.
Mm-hmm.
And 1419. United States. Southfield, Michigan. I'm always open to hearing kind of your interpretation of the mental projector. That was something that came up in another class. And what else? What else? Anything specific? I don't know. What hearing you talk has been completely different than anything I've heard. So, anything specific that stands out for you that you want to talk about?
100%. Yep. So the first thing is your design is entirely unconscious, right? So what Ross said about that, and I think this is a slow burn contemplation, it's true of me as well. And let's use this as an illustrative example. My design is entirely unconscious. Is that clear to everyone?
No.
Okay, so it doesn't matter that there's half black and half red, right? As there is here and here and here, right? Those are unconscious, just as much as this is, right? So unless it's black, unless it's defined by the personality all the way across, it's unconscious, effectively, right?
Okay.
So Julie's a more obvious case, right? Because it's entirely defined by the design side. So, the irony is that as a mental projector, you're only consistent, well, in your particular configuration, because you could be a mental projector and have a defined throat, but in your particular configuration, you're a consistent thinker, right? You're always logical and you're always processing the past. You've got these two different, you're a very visual mind, right? Also acoustic with that hanging 43, but primarily a visual mind. And there is an experience of one sort of stream of thought is a bit like a movie trailer that's kind of jumping around a lot, right? And you're trying to make meaning and sense out of the past, and you also want to kind of process things logically. It's always like just poking holes and like doubting, and does this really work? Does it really, really, really work? I have the channel of logic as well. So it's just one of the ironies is that the mind is never for us, right? It's outer authority. It's for other people, right? And yet that's the only consistent function that you have, right? And then because it's entirely unconsciously defined, Ross said that you can't be present with the life force, right? You can't be present with the life force. The psychological implications of that are when you introspect. Now, I know that, you're not a young adult at this point, and so you've figured out things about yourself along the way. However, it's an experience of introspecting and really just landing on imagination about who you are. So there would have been some sort of a journey about, oh, what's my purpose? And then the mind makes up answers. It just makes up answers about what your purpose could be, right? So there probably was, not necessarily, but most likely there was a lot of different things that your mind came up with in response to that question of who am I, which you're asking because of that undefined G, but you're also asking it purely on the basis of being entirely unconsciously defined. Who am I? What am I here to do? What's my purpose? Right? So let me just take a pause there. Is that
I'm looking to you to tell me. I'm kidding, but I'm not kidding. I mean, I think that makes sense. I'm finding that the more I'm learning, the more confused I'm becoming, or the more like trying to wrap my head around things in a new way. Yeah, I feel like, I was just having this conversation with somebody when I was first introduced to human design and learned that I was a projector. It was like, oh my God. Okay, so this explains a lot. This explains why things haven't worked out. And now that I'm been a student and been in my experiment for a little over 3 years, I feel like I'm at that place again of like, I'm getting more information, and the more the information that I'm adding onto the conversation is like, okay, well, maybe I don't really know what it means to have outer authority. And I'm not getting this like job thing, right? Like I'm invitations and making money and all of that. When before I knew human design, I was much more successful in some ways. And now everything's contemplative and being patient and waiting. I'm like doing it right. And being in the study, but not manifesting anything. And I'm in that conversation of like, I need to make money. I all of that.
Right. So my experience of the human design experiment and the experience of most of my friends and colleagues in it is that there is a crisis that ensues in the first 7 years, or several crises. It is a time of things breaking down. It is a detoxification. And in a detoxification, the gunk has to come up, right? You have to sweat things out. You have to vomit things out. You have to purge, right? And so it does not just make life better, because our definition of better is very homogenized, first of all, right? And the picture of the life that we think that we want to have and so on and so forth isn't to be trusted. So there is this detoxification happening. There's also a period of time where we're all pretty confused about what it means to follow strategy and authority. Anyone that acts like that's that simple hasn't looked into it very closely, right? There's a lot of subtleties to that, right? No matter what your, type and inner authority, is. And I do recommend that you speak to fellow projectors and get guidance from them. And I also recommend you speak to at least generators, right? Because you're plugging into us, right? And so one thing I can tell you is that you really are genetically coded to be recognized. And I had the experience. As a matter of fact, I think the first time I had the experience, at least the first time I tracked it, the first time it was conscious, was at the first High Desert Human Design Conference in 2021. And then I met other projectors that were deeper in their experiment. And I was like, wow, I really am compelled to know what they see, right? And it's a real mechanic. I've also seen with another friend in my life that I've known for 20 years, who's not into human design, but he's coming off the roof and he's kind of beleaguered, he only has one channel, initiation. So very open design like yourself. And I found myself recognizing his gifts and being like, hey, you know, and I'm not even doing this consciously. This wasn't a scheme from a human design standpoint. This was me very just naturally being like, hey, you're really great at that. Why don't you sell that service? I will help you put the website together. You know, basically what I'm saying is I'll be your generator. I'll give you the energy. You know, I see you. So it's important to get the feedback from generators that you can really trust that that really does work. But the key to the whole thing is you have to be you. Otherwise, the recognition that you're getting isn't aligned and won't really serve you. I want to take a little pause there. Does that all make sense?
The generator plugin, yes. The me being me, yes. The recognition, not so much. So, and I'm just like Mary said, like I'm going to be 55 next week. Like I'm a little bit like, I don't care anymore. Like I'm done I'm done caring so deeply what people think and coming into my own in terms of sharing my unique perspective and like recognizing that that's what I am here to do. So that is okay. But the recognition part, and I have this, you know, I have this real resistance against social media, being visible on social media, that kind of thing. So being recognized and being in the right environment, maybe it's the environment. I don't know. There's just definitely a disconnect for me right now. There's a disconnect for me. So
yeah, I understand that. A couple things here. You know, in terms of recognition, Ross sometimes talks about recognition as if someone's going to come along and just keynote your chart, you know, and say, wow, you're such a logical person, or that's an amazing realization you just, you know, gave me, you know, wow, that's an incredible, you know, whatever, insight or opinion you have. Yeah, that can happen, right? But for example, one of my best friends, it's a projector, and we've been friends now for, I think, 5 years or so. I met her in some trainings. It was her voice that really got me because I'm a low sound person. You're sensitive to sound as well, but you're on the other side of it. You're a high sound person, right? So, but we're both filtering for the right sounds, right? And that could be, for me, it's very much if I don't like someone's voice, never fails, they're not my person. I trust it 100%. You know, there was opportunities for me to meet certain people at the most recent conference, and I heard of some voices and I kind of got a cringe and I was like, well, that's not happening. Right. So you're opposite of me. I get put off by people that are too loud. Even though I'm a booming 4521 voice myself, I'm too loud for myself. But you know, people that are too loud and boisterous, that really stresses me out. So, but you might need people that are, you know, more, they're louder, they're bigger personalities, that kind of a thing. But
I get so overstimulated though. Like the noise thing, like I like noise, but I can't, I get overstimulated. That's one thing I'm definitely more aware of the older I get, or maybe it's the projector thing of like, it's just, I get overstimulated, too much energy, too much activity, too much noise, too much, like I'm always trying to create Zen. So I'll have music on, but it's, you know, hand drums and sound bowls. Like it's not a intense kind of thing for me. And maybe I should play around with it, but my husband can come in and be like jamming on the guitar and I'm like, so.
yeah, I mean, so it's a couple things. I mean, it is about decibels on a mundane level, but it's also about pitch. It's also about other more subtle things. Anyway, I don't know whether the most fruitful line of conversation is to go super far into your PHS, but I mean, maybe it is, because I think in the case of a design like yours, okay, so part of the overstimulation is you have all these open centers, right? You're feeling a lot. And to go back to the beginning of the conversation, this is a very slippery, dynamic, subtle not self, right? You would be well served by someone that can really go deep into your rave psychology, into your not self, because you're playing a pure awareness game. It isn't about allocation of energy. It's how can you be centered in yourself in the presence of a lot of energy, That's the number one thing for you. And the other thing is, in terms of the guidance, most of the time, you know, in the not self world, we could say, you know, projectors are giving guidance, they're interjecting, but not for the benefit of the other person. It's for their own safety. Like your capacity to have nervous system capacity and resiliency, right, is what enables you to hold your cards when you see what's not working for that generator, right? Because otherwise you're not really giving them, you're not really doing a service for them, right? It's all for you. It's creating safety for yourself. And this design is very prone to feel like you need to create safety for yourself, right? I need to create safety for myself.
I have a couple comments to that. I think that's a really great point of the openness wanting to preempt and not allowing to wait the time necessary to wait to be invited, to wait to be recognized, and so on. And then also just a couple comments on just the overstimulation from that much openness. One would be showing up early so you can kind of allow things to emerge. Like I noticed that even because I have quite a bit of openness in my chart, if I just show up when something's already in full swing, it can be very chaotic and hard to kind of synchronize to that. So for instance, coming to a high desert human design event, come a few days early and just slow down and really take the time to allow the energy to build slowly so that it builds brick by brick, and you can kind of calibrate and notice and see the whole story of the energy. I also loved your point, James, about this being the pure awareness game, that it's not about am I using my energy correctly? It's all about awareness. And so for that, I think that there's so much wisdom potential that it really is the question of what you've learned in your life experience about what happens when you're with the right people or the wrong people. If you're with the wrong people, that undefined spleen is going to get 10 IQ points dumber or 50 IQ points dumber. I mean, the undefined spleen is only as smart as the people it's around. That undefined G is going to be conditioned to have a certain standard in their life by the people it's around. And then I guess the last thing was just saying about the recognition and being recognized for head ajna. I mean, particularly being recognized for 6447 and 634. That's such an obscure thing to be recognized for. I think of the Santa Fe Institute, where they do complexity science and they do models of what would happen if New York City didn't get water for a week. And they do all sorts of weird thought experiments and things like that. And so, I mean, those are the kinds of things that a 6447 and a 634 will be recognized for, is what they have figured out or solved, what patterns they've come up with or noticed, what questions they've asked or answered, what realizations they've had. I mean, I guess in the sense of making sense of confusion. There's all of these things that, you know, are not like normal things to be recognized for, like a 4426 being recognized for making a great product everyone loves. It's not like that. It's something obscure. And so there is a bit of a mystery here, but it's not a mystery that can be solved by thinking about it. It's a mystery that can only be discovered when you're with the right people. So it comes back to probably the most challenging question for mental projectors is, how do I make decisions? And I almost wonder if ultimately decisions are a distraction. And I wonder if it's really more about developing the awareness of understanding who's healthy for you and who isn't, who's the right G center, who isn't, who makes you comfortable, who doesn't, that all of that development of that wisdom is what it's more about than what decision do I make?
Yeah, 100%. I love what Jonah just said. I wouldn't worry about the decisions, because life is, the chapters of your life are going to, the pages of your life turn by who you're with, right? And being recognized and invited correctly. So discernment around the right people naturally leads to the correct unfolding of your life, right? That is the most important thing. And in terms of that, you do want to be thinking about, you know, right place, you know, this market environment, the right acoustic quality, right, to that environment. You want to be thinking about people who don't pull you into fear and don't pull you into overthinking, thinking past what's really necessary, right?
There's possibly so many kids.
Do you have the power to mute, James?
Oh, yeah, I was just thrown off there whether that was a question. I'm sure I do somewhere here. Yeah, I don't see it. Let's just continue. So,
Or you can make me the host really quick. I'm happy to be the mute bunny.
Be Ursula.
Yeah, if you want to make me or somebody else the host, we can
Yeah, I don't
we can
see
be on mute duty. I remember when Alok was doing his talk for HDHD on Zoom, and we had about 70 people coming in, and he had microphone mute off as the default setting, so everybody who came in suddenly jumped in with a bunch of noise.
I got it. I have her muted.
Ah, perfect. Thank you.
Okay. My train of thought here. So what I was saying is you want to be, Julie, you want to be thinking about color a lot, as well as your cognition, right? You want to get into substructure, right? This is going to help you orient yourself in terms of finding the right people, right, that are correct for you. You know, people that bring you to a place of fear, people that tend to get you to overthink things aren't really serving you. People that you're inclined to take things personally with, you know, that isn't really serving you. You know, always directing the thought back to, well, what about me? How does that affect me? You know, it's not about that either. I also wanted to say to you a couple other things. One is that in your soundboarding process, your process is going to have some consistency to it. Okay, so I would advise you to be soundboarding in person because it's about getting hookups, right? It's about that ARC conditioning, right? Helping you facilitate your truth, and you're listening for yourself, right? You're listening to what comes out of your mouth, right? Now, there's a concept of no inner authority, and I've heard Ra regret saying that. The thing is that your inner authority is interdependent with other people and the environment, right? But I want to just empower you with the awareness that there is a familiarity to the process. So talking to people that don't have a quote unquote inner authority, they do indicate some familiarity to the terrain, right? So I want you to start to track that, right? And you're listening to what you say over time with multiple trusted people that aren't invested in the outcome. They can be neutral, right? They're just letting you find your truth. They're not steering you in any way, shape, or form, right? Like if you're soundboarding with someone that you, for example, can't let go of, you're not going to be able to have an unbiased, neutral conversation, right? If you're soundboarding with someone that you're afraid of how they might, you know, how are they judging you, you're not going to be able to have a neutral, unbiased conversation. Or someone that emotionally overwhelms you, or whatever the case might be. So you need to find those right people, multiple people over time, listen to what you say, start to get familiar with your process, and really learn about what your motivation and your view and your PHS and your environment are all about. And those are important markers for you to orient yourself. And I think Jonah had a really fantastic point. Let go of decision-making, let it all flow from the right people. Right?
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate your time and your
Yeah.
wisdom. Thank you.
My pleasure. Okay. Well, unless there's any other questions, I think it's probably time.
And I just want to say one more thing. Jonah, I thank you for the answer to my question, because when you were talking about like two different ways that something can go in a center, that clicked in and said, oh, now I get it. Kind of that fight between the active gates and the center really said, my sacral said yes to that. So I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I've seen that myself, and it's something that requires more investigation, but I've seen like people who have multiple root solar plexus channels, and they don't seem to be emotional at all. And it's just such an interesting thing. But I think it's that, it just changes the functioning quite a bit. So that's also relevant here to Julie's chart. Yeah, I just want to say thank you again so much, James. These sessions have been such a treat, and having access to your incredible knowledge and also just your intuitive way of, I mean, it's really empowering to me as an analyst to see your ability to weave together various aspects of the chart that tell the same story from different angles. And that's something that I haven't done as much. I have no problem cutting the chart up, but putting it all back together again is quite the talent, and I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. My pleasure. Well, thank you, everyone. Jonah, I guess these are all available somewhere in Signpost. Is that correct?
Yeah,
All
these
the-
are on the video archive there. So folks can just look on the video archive, and we just post them after they're done. And I usually post them in Maine as well. And if anyone is not on Discord, we will be posting them on the website as well soon. We have a members only area that we're working on where they will be.
Cool. Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Take care.